In regions where temperatures plunge to minus 40 degrees Celsius or lower, entire trains sit idle overnight in frozen rail yards, yet the crews inside stay alive and warm. How? With no hotels for hundreds of miles and engines that cannot simply be left running forever. Survival seems impossible, but crews do it every single night without incident. A single failure in extreme cold can be fatal within hours, and a stalled locomotive can freeze solid. So staying warm is not comfort. It is a matter of life and death. When the sun sets over the East Siberian taiga or the wind sweeps across northern Manitoba, the quiet of the rail yard becomes deceptive. Inside these parked, multi-ton masses of steel, railroaders face a silent clock. The train itself represents a fragile paradox, a heavy metal shell designed to cut through frozen wilderness, yet one that can instantly transform into a giant, heat-sapping freezer. Without an active source of warmth, the steel cabin acts as a rapid thermal conductor, drawing the residual heat out of the air and the human body within minutes. There are no backup cabins, no heated buildings nearby, and no rescue teams capable of reaching these desolate tracks in a midnight blizzard. For the crew huddled inside, the physical boundary between a safe haven and a lethal steel trap is paper-thin. Under these conditions, sleep is a calculated risk, a physical state where the body's metabolic heat must be defended against an aggressive environment. How these crews manage to maintain a survivable pocket of warmth throughout the frozen night remains a hidden masterpiece of engineering and human discipline. Along the Trans-Siberian Corridor, between the remote outposts of Mogocha and Skovorodino, winter nights routinely drop to minus 62 degrees Celsius. At this extreme temperature, the physical properties of everyday materials alter completely, defying standard engineering tolerances. Steel becomes brittle and prone to shattering, rubber gaskets freeze into hard plastic, and exposed human skin freezes in under 60 seconds. To the north lies Oymyakon, the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth. Here, the official record stands at minus 67.78 degrees Celsius, with unofficial local readings reaching as low as minus 71.2 degrees. This is not the winter of snowy postcards and light jackets. This is an environment of absolute physical hostility, where the air itself feels heavy and dangerous, thick with ice crystals that sting the lungs with every breath. In these desolate territories, warmth is not a luxury. It is a strictly calculated line between life and death. When a multi-ton, steel freight train stops overnight in a remote siding, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest town or rescue service, the cold immediately begins its silent assault. A single mechanical failure, a dead battery, or a sudden loss of engine power triggers a rapid, life-threatening decline toward hypothermia. The crews who work these frozen corridors operate with the constant, sobering knowledge that they are always one system failure away from a lethal emergency. Survival under these conditions is entirely a matter of defense, requiring absolute, uninterrupted protection from an environment that remains completely unforgiving. These extreme conditions are not confined to a single isolated outpost. They define thousands of active, high-volume rail networks stretching across Siberia, northern Canada, and the Trans-Siberian routes. These are inhabited, working industrial environments where freight and passenger services operate around the clock. Along the Winnipeg to Churchill corridor in northern Manitoba, crews face average winter temperatures of minus 27 degrees Celsius. When polar storms strike, winds screaming at 110 kilometers per hour drive the wind chill down to a bone-chilling minus 48 degrees Celsius. In these environments, rail yards and passing sidings are frequently situated deep in the wilderness, hours or even days away from the nearest town. When a train is staged overnight in these remote locations, the crew cannot outsource their survival to ordinary lodging. There are no hotels, no warm buildings, and no roads. Heavy snow drifts and blinding blizzards make emergency evacuation by road or air physically impossible. If a crew is stranded, no rescue team can reach them quickly. The train itself must become a self-sustaining life support capsule. In these isolated frozen yards, the crew is entirely on their own, and the battle against the cold must be won with whatever resources are already on board. Ordinary passengers looking at a stationary train in a frozen rail yard see only a silent, dark mass of steel. They rarely notice the hidden survival systems operating just out of sight. Yet these systems are actively running long before anyone climbs into a bunk. The massive diesel engine serves as the crew's primary protector. But this machine carries an engineering vulnerability that makes shutting it down a critical threat. Unlike smaller commercial vehicles, standard diesel locomotives use plain water cooling systems containing absolutely no antifreeze. If an operator shuts down the engine in extreme cold, the stagnant water freezes inside the internal cooling passages within hours. Because ice expands with incredible force, this freezing action will crack the heavy metal engine block, destroying the locomotive permanently. At the same time, the extreme cold directly attacks the fuel and lubrication. When the temperature falls below -10 degrees Celsius, standard diesel fuel undergoes a chemical change called gelling. Paraffin wax crystallizes and separates from the liquid, forming a thick, waxy slush that completely plugs the fuel filters. Meanwhile, the engine's lubricating oil thickens to the consistency of heavy tar, creating so much resistance that the starter motors cannot spin the crankshaft. A frozen locomotive becomes completely immobilized, and restarting it requires specialized external heating equipment that is rarely available in remote rail yards. If the fire inside the engine dies, the crew's shield against the elements vanishes, turning the steel cab into a rapid conductor of lethal cold. This creates an unforgiving reality where shutting down the machinery means destroying it. To an outside observer, leaving a massive multi-thousand horsepower engine roaring throughout the night looks like an expensive waste of energy. But in sub-zero railroading, continuous idling is a deliberate heat strategy, not a sign of neglect. At -40 degrees Celsius, a stationary locomotive burns 4 to 5 gallons of diesel every hour. Over a 12-hour layover, a single locomotive consumes up to 60 gallons of fuel without moving an inch. This fuel burn is a calculated trade-off. While the environmental and economic costs are high, the alternative is immediate mechanical paralysis. Because a frozen locomotive cannot be restarted without specialized external heating equipment, keeping the engine running is the only way to guarantee a continuous supply of electricity and warmth in the wilderness. The heat generated by this massive prime mover does more than protect the steel and fluids of the locomotive itself. It is directly tied to the survival of the crew resting inside. In the isolation of a frozen rail yard, the roaring engine is the only barrier against the sub-zero night. As long as the diesel burns, water pumps circulate warm coolant, generators power the cabin heaters, and the crew's sleeping quarters remain a safe haven. The moment the engine stops, the cabin begins to cool, and the clock starts ticking against the human body. In these territories, the mechanical life of the machine and the physical survival of its crew are completely inseparable. For railroaders sleeping in the cabins or bunk cars behind the cab, the constant low vibration of the engine is not a disturbance, but the very sound of safety. For decades, keeping a multi-ton engine roaring was the only way to survive the freeze. but modern rail engineering has designed a far more efficient shield against the sub-zero night. Rather than burning massive amounts of fuel just to keep a locomotive alive, railroads are adopting specialized layover heating systems that protect the machinery while the main engine is completely shut down. Consider the setup on diesel locomotive 438. Instead of letting its massive prime mover idle through the night, crews use a compact, dedicated layover heater. This self-contained system actively circulates coolant through the dead engine at a constant 80 degrees Fahrenheit, keeping the block warm enough to prevent catastrophic freezing. Modern iterations of this technology, engineered by companies like Hotstart, Webasto, and Espar, rely on patented designs that heat and circulate both water and lubricating oil simultaneously. Many of these configurations utilize a small, highly efficient auxiliary power unit, APU. In extreme cold, where a standard idling engine would consume immense amounts of diesel, these compact units draw as little as 2 to 3 liters of fuel per hour, representing a 90% reduction in fuel consumption. This changes the entire approach to winter survival from raw, brute force idling to targeted thermal design. The small, localized heat generators maintain battery charge, keep vital fluids from solidifying, and provide a constant, reliable source of warmth. Rather than defending the entire massive locomotive frame, these closed-loop systems focus their energy precisely where it matters most, directing warm air and heated fluids straight toward the insulated spaces where the crew rests. These insulated spaces are highly specialized, precision-engineered habitats designed to preserve human life in climates that can freeze structural steel. On modern high-latitude routes, providing a safe resting environment is treated with the same level of rigorous engineering as traction power and locomotive propulsion. In 2025, Russian railways introduced their updated SV crew cars, representing a major technological advancement for winter survival on the rails. Built explicitly to withstand the brutal, heat-sapping drafts of Siberian yards, these heavily insulated rolling structures replace cramped, drafty cabins with a highly optimized living environment. Each car is configured with 8 double compartments featuring spacious 2-meter-long berths designed to accommodate fully gear-laden personnel. The interior layout maximizes functional space, integrating large overhead storage cabinets, operator call buttons, multimedia systems, personal power outlets, and USB charging ports. This design ensures that crews working in isolated sub-zero environments can recuperate without exposure to the freezing metal shell of the carriage, transforming a potentially lethal night on a remote siding into a controlled, comfortable sanctuary. This systematic approach to crew preservation is a standard operating requirement across all harsh regions. In North America, Canadian overnight rail services operating through the sub-Arctic corridors of northern Manitoba rely on a similar structural philosophy. On long, remote routes where lodging is non-existent, railways deploy dedicated sleeper accommodations specifically for crew rest. These cars act as mobile, climate-controlled safe zones, heavily insulated against the biting winds of the Canadian Shield. By standardizing these purpose-built sleeper quarters across the network, railways ensure that survival is never left to individual endurance. Crews resting through a -40-degree night are protected by an engineered, structural line of defense built directly into the train consist. To bridge the gap between mechanical power and human survival, railroads employ 2 distinct pathways to deliver warmth into these insulated spaces. The first relies directly on the active locomotive, routing engine-generated heat through connected lines back to the crew accommodations. The second uses independent diesel-fired heating systems installed directly within the sleeper cars themselves. This standalone setup ensures that even if a locomotive is completely decoupled, The crew quarters retain a self-sustaining envelope of warmth. When locomotives remain connected, modern efficiency relies on specialized auxiliary power units rather than the main engine. A prominent example is the Hot Start Locomotive Auxiliary Power Unit. This self-contained diesel-fueled module delivers 19 kilowatts of combined heat directly to the engine coolant, lubricating oil, and cab heater core. By maintaining these critical thermal levels, the system keeps the massive prime mover warm enough to start instantly, while continuously pumping reliable heat into the adjacent crew spaces. The engineering advantage of this setup is defined by its efficiency. In extreme cold, where a standard idling locomotive consumes substantial fuel, the auxiliary power unit draws only 2 to 3 liters of diesel per hour. This targeted thermal management also yields massive emissions improvements. Operating this unit instead of idling the prime mover reduces nitrogen oxide emissions by 91%, hydrocarbons by 94%, carbon monoxide by 96%, and particulate matter by 84%. By replacing raw mechanical size with precise, localized heat generation, these systems secure the crew's survival while drastically reducing the environmental toll of the sub-zero night. When infrastructure allows, railroads bypass diesel consumption entirely using electric shore power kits. These systems plug directly into a rail yard's local electrical grid, feeding power to internal heating elements that keep the engine block, oil pan, and passenger cabins warm. In electrified yards, this setup eliminates emissions and fuel burn overnight, preserving locomotive readiness with zero reliance on the diesel tank. For routes lacking this heavy electrical infrastructure, compact diesel air heaters offer a highly localized alternative. Manufactured by companies like Webasto and Espar, these small 4 to 6 kilowatt units draw tiny amounts of fuel directly from the main tank to heat the air inside crew spaces. Because they bypass the locomotive's primary coolant loops entirely, they function as independent, lightweight shields against the freeze, making them ideal for remote branch lines where retrofitting larger auxiliary units is impractical. On other corridors, older heating methods still remain active. In remote corners of the Siberian network, legacy systems still endure. Some older passenger and crew cars rely on traditional coal-fired stoves positioned at the end of the carriage. This simple, hands-on method uses solid fuel to heat water for tea and circulate basic warmth through pipes. It requires constant manual attention from the crew to keep the fire lit, representing a stark contrast to automated sensor-driven systems. These varying technologies show that survival on the winter rails is not governed by a single standard. Instead, railroads adapt their defenses to the local environment, blending modern electrical grids, targeted diesel air units, and raw coal heat to keep their personnel alive in the deep freeze. When sub-zero storms lock down a rail corridor, the math of human shift work collides directly with the laws of thermodynamics. Under normal conditions, railway dispatchers manage handovers and crew rest using strict, hour-based regulatory limits. But in extreme winter, the clock is no longer the only authority. Scheduling must bend to the state of the machinery itself. Operational analyses from the Congressional Research Service highlight a fundamental winter reality. Locomotives must continue running to maintain critical air brake pressure and prevent engine fluids from dropping below safe operating temperatures. If a train stops for too long and the mechanical systems cool down, the air brake system can lose pressure completely, risking catastrophic brake failure. Because of this, dispatchers and operations managers cannot simply swap crews whenever a standard shift ends. They treat the train's thermal state as the primary scheduling constraint. If a relief crew is delayed by heavy snow, or if a remote passing siding lacks the infrastructure to support a stationary train, dispatchers will refuse to authorize a handover. Instead, they keep the train moving toward a secure yard, altering schedules based on real-time temperature readings. The decision to halt is managed by dispatchers who know that a frozen train becomes an immovable, unrescuable block of steel. If the mechanical shield of the train fails entirely, survival shrinks to the space of a few millimeters of fabric. Every crew member carries a highly engineered personal protection system designed to function when all external power is lost. This defense begins with a strict 3-layer clothing strategy: a breathable, tight-fitting merino wool base layer to wick away moisture, followed by high-loft fleece or down mid-layers, and topped by heavy, windproof outer parkas rated to -50 degrees Celsius. But the ultimate line of defense is the extreme cold sleeping bag. Specialized models like the RAB Expedition 1400 or the Pajak Radical 16H are rated down to -50 or even -73 degrees Celsius. These bags use sophisticated draft collars and H-shaped thermal baffles to trap a critical pocket of metabolic heat, keeping a sleeper alive in an unheated cabin overnight. To sustain life during a prolonged wait for rescue, crews keep dedicated emergency kits directly on hand. These survival packs contain chemical hand warmers, portable solid fuel stoves to melt ice for drinking water, and two-way radios to maintain contact with dispatchers. Essential to this kit is a portable carbon monoxide detector, a critical safeguard to prevent silent poisoning if crews are forced to use combustion heaters in a sealed, unventilated cab. These items are not accessories for comfort. They are the absolute, final barrier against a lethal freeze. When a primary heating system fails in sub-zero wilderness, the margin for error vanishes. The survival protocol shifts immediately from automated control to a manual, pre-planned backup chain. The first priority is protecting the locomotive's ability to restart. Crews manually activate battery heating pads, keeping the lead-acid batteries above -20 degrees Celsius so they do not lose the critical cranking power needed to turn over the engine. At the same time, portable diesel or electric heaters are deployed directly inside the cabin. These compact backup units generate localized heat, maintaining a temporary pocket of warmth within the freezing metal shell of the cab. Because using portable combustion heaters in a sealed cabin risks silent poisoning, crews must continuously monitor their personal carbon monoxide detectors. If these immediate onboard measures cannot recover the cabin's temperature, the dispatcher initiates the final step in the emergency response chain, routing a rescue locomotive to the exact coordinates of the stranded train. This recovery engine hooks onto the consist to supply external power, pump warm coolant, and restore air brake pressure. Winter railroading survives through pre-planned redundancy rather than hoping primary systems never break. This systematic, multi-tiered safety chain ensures that when the heat fails, the backup systems are already prepared to protect human life. Preventing a critical failure in the extreme freeze relies on automated vigilance. Modern locomotives use smart stop-start logic that continuously tracks oil temperature, battery voltage, and ambient conditions to determine exactly when it is safe to shut down the main engine. This system ensures the machinery never cools past the point of no return, protecting the locomotive block from thermal cracking. Yet software alone cannot secure a train against a sub-zero night. The ultimate defense is a rigorous, hands-on routine of preventive maintenance. Crews manage winter-grade fuel to prevent waxing, conduct strict insulation checks on exposed conduits, and service onboard heaters long before the temperature drops. In the yard, real-time telemetry systems monitor battery states and temperature levels, flagging minor drops before they escalate. These systems provide constant operational visibility across the entire fleet, warning dispatchers before a locomotive freezes. This daily discipline targets the primary failure modes of winter railroading: frozen fuel lines, brittle fittings, coolant freeze, and battery capacity loss. In these environments, a loose valve or a weak electrical connection is a quiet path to disaster. The human face of this silent engineering is found in the quiet, repetitive checks performed during a midnight shift. It is a calm, unyielding routine of manual inspection, checking lines, testing heaters, and verifying voltages that transforms an incredibly hostile environment into a manageable, survivable workspace. Early railway workers faced winter conditions with almost zero mechanical insulation or automated protection. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, crews operating through northern frontiers survived by adapting crude, localized heating systems to wooden and uninsulated steel cars. In passenger and early crew transport, heat was entirely dependent on steam generators. These systems routed low-pressure saturated steam from the locomotive boiler through a network of pipes running beneath the carriage floors. While functional, steam heating was highly vulnerable. If the locomotive lost pressure or the pipes froze, the entire heating grid failed, turning carriages into ice boxes within minutes. For cargo crews and track laborers, the reality was even more basic. Many spent layovers in modified boxcars or cabooses, where the sole source of warmth was a cast-iron, coal-fired stove bolted to the floorboards. Keeping these stoves burning required constant manual labor. Crews had to continuously shovel coal and tend the fire throughout the night, facing a dangerous trade-off. A dying fire meant waking up to sub-zero temperatures, while an unchecked stove risked igniting the wooden structures or causing fatal carbon monoxide poisoning in poorly ventilated spaces. The transition to modern climate control did not happen overnight. It was forged through a century of incremental engineering adjustments, driven by the need to protect human lives and keep essential trade routes open. Early insulated cabins slowly replaced drafty wooden walls, and automated diesel heaters eventually eliminated the need for manual coal feeding. This long evolution transformed the nature of winter railroading. What was once an exhausting struggle of raw physical endurance and constant fire tending has become a highly controlled, closed-loop system of thermal management, allowing modern crews to rest safely in environments that would have been fatal to their predecessors. Trains operating along the Trans-Siberian Line and the Winnipeg to Churchill corridor keep entire regions alive. The Trans-Siberian route serves as a major freight artery across Eurasia, moving massive shipments of coal, oil, gas, and raw minerals that fuel distant industrial hubs. Passenger services, including the long-distance Russia Express, rely on this same path to carry travelers across thousands of miles of frozen territory. Along these vast Eurasian tracks, the continuous flow of cargo trains supports the delivery of resources to eastern ports. In northern Canada, the Winnipeg to Churchill line functions as the sole year-round surface link for isolated sub-Arctic communities. Stretching over 1,100 kilometers of boreal forest and tundra, this northern route represents the dividing line between a functional economy and complete isolation for those living near the edge of Hudson Bay. It carries critical goods like grain, heavy machinery, mineral concentrates, and daily supplies that local populations and regional industries depend on to survive. In these extreme environments, winter rail operations remain a strategic necessity. Severe permafrost, dense muskeg, and heavy snowdrifts mean that reliable road alternatives are highly limited or completely non-existent. When winter storms lock down the region, highways are swallowed by snow or rendered impassable by shifting permafrost, leaving the railway as the only viable corridor capable of hauling bulk cargo. A sudden shutdown of these lines triggers immediate and severe economic consequences. It severs the fragile supply chains that remote towns depend on for their daily existence. To prevent complete isolation during a rail freeze, operators must pivot to air freight, an expensive substitute that dramatically inflates the cost of food, medical supplies, and heating fuel. The engineering systems and human discipline that keep train crews warm are the unrecognized foundation of this regional movement. By ensuring that operators can safely rest and work in sub-zero wilderness, these hidden thermal technologies prevent systemic paralysis. Every idling engine, every insulated bunk car, and every carefully planned schedule keeps these vital corridors open, protecting the workers who keep global trade and local survival moving. Today, as global supply chains face increasingly unpredictable climates, these invisible defenses are all that stand between movement and absolute paralysis. The warmth inside these frozen yards is more than a survival tactic. It is the pulse keeping our interconnected world from freezing in its tracks. Every night, while the world sleeps, a silent battle is won against the cold. What hidden systems should we uncover next? Let us know in the comments.